Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 335 of the Health Detective Podcast. At this point, I mean, the numbers are just getting ridiculous. I can't wait for 400, but like I'm saying, at this point, it doesn't even seem to matter. 335 seems crazy, and somehow we always have fresh and cool topics to do in each of these. So I'm very excited for this one today, because we have a fellow podcast host with us, and I will read his bio and then we'll jump right into it. So our guest today, Josh Dech, is an ex-paramedic, holistic nutritionist, and medical lecturer. After doing what medicine thought was impossible, helping to reverse almost 300 cases of Crohn's and colitis, he's been connected to some of the world's most famous doctors. He lectures at the Priority Health Academy, helping teach doctors the holistic approach to IBD, and he also hosts a top 5% globally ranked podcast in the health space as well. So Josh, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Evan. Thanks so much for having me on board.
Yeah, first of the week, so that's always fun, and this seems like it's going to be a good topic today. Now, I just want you guys to know, I was a little clickbaity on the topic, but it actually isn't, because Josh really does have an answer to this. So I made the title all about like why 5% of the population makes up 50% of these cases and conditions. Before we get into that specifically, the one thing I wanted to talk about, Josh, and this is kind of how I always start the show, is very few people get into this line of work by accident.
Yes.
Usually there was some type of personal story or something that someone close to them dealt with. So I'm just curious, what did that look like? How did you end up even getting into this space as a holistic nutritionist?
That is a really great question. It really started, what I like to say is a whole series of happy accidents. When I graduated, I wanted to be in medicine. I wanted to be in healthcare. And so I went right into paramedics out of high school. And I started when I was about 19 years old. And I loved it. I loved going into emergencies and the puzzle behind when someone's sick, why they're sick, if there's a stroke or a heart attack, what to do and the steps. But eventually it became very monotonous. And I realized pretty quickly I was in sick care, not healthcare. People weren't getting better. And I worked in a small rural community in Newfoundland. We had all kinds of amazing stuff we had to do because it was just a shit show, if I can say that on your show, of a paramedic service. But the idea is, people just got sicker, and we picked the same people up over and over until they just died. And they went back to the hospital for more of the same medication or new medication, and nobody actually healed or recovered. And so through a chain of happy accidents in my early 20s, I became a personal trainer. And I was really into the gut and the nutrition and figuring out what's wrong with people's stuff. And I had a woman coming in to see me, 57 years old, when we started together. And she was on 17 pills and insulin for breakfast, 9 pills and insulin for bedtime. She had a CPAP machine, high blood pressure. She was on the disability list at work. Like when there was a fire, 28, 30 floors up, wherever she was, she had to wait. She just stood there because she couldn't get down the stairs.
Oh my God.
And so we worked together for 2 years, basic nutrition, gut, lifestyle, everything. And at age 59 years old, Evan, she was off all but 2 medications, strictly due to a surgery. And we actually threw her into her first powerlifting competition in Canada. She broke her world record at 59.
That's awesome.
Like, isn't that stupid? And that's the idea. It just really blew my mind. This is what the human body is capable of when we give it the tools and resources it needs to begin healing itself. It's always trying to heal us. So I had to ask the question, what is it that's causing the breakdown? And like Dr. William Lee suggests, why don't we get sick more often? What is it that's keeping us healthy?
Yep.
And once I started diving into that, I realized through my personal training career that everybody I saw, anxiety, depression, skin issues, joint pain, fatigue, it all came back to the gut. And so I was hooked. I was at a trade show and a conference. Another happy accident, was there for another job. And this woman was talking about the microbiome. And the stuff she started throwing in, I know your listeners are familiar, so I won't drone on about the microbiome. My jaw was on the floor. It's the first time I've ever heard it. I ever heard of what a microbiome was, that it can literally determine how personal you want to be in a given day, what diseases you will or won't get. It determines everything and is arguably as important as your DNA. And I was hooked. It was love at first sight. I went all in, became a nutritionist, and then just started meeting people where they were at the needs. And I got into gut health and gut disease. And now here I am in Crohn's and colitis specifically.
This is so cool. I really liked a few things that you said, especially, and I wanted to emphasize that point of why don't we get sick more often, because that might sound funny initially to some of our listeners, but I think I get exactly what you're saying. I hope I do, at least, in the sense that I kind of am actually amazed sometimes at how far we can go from nature. Like, think about if any other animal went this far from nature. I mean, the fact that we're all still surviving well enough and Western medicine can help maintain us is it really is miraculous. It's kind of insane, again, that we don't get sicker sooner. Now, some people do get sick soon. I got sick at 5 years old, but it's amazing how much abuse the body could take otherwise. And for many people, it'll be years before those things happen. And then similarly, in terms of the amazingness of it, is the fact that you can have someone that is already wildly sick, like this woman that you were talking about, and then not only reverse the health conditions, but go out to actually do things that are very physically impressive, like break a world record in powerlifting. I mean, that's nuts. And I think it
Yes.
goes to show it's the same thing for both of these things. And I probably don't emphasize this point enough on this podcast, mostly because it can't be emphasized enough. I do bring it up, but it's that as fancy as the labs are, as fancy as the protocols get, yes, we like diet, all that stuff. What's really working is that the human body wants to heal and it wants to be healthy. And so when you give it the right input, you're just letting it do its job. It's not like all of this stuff is magic. It's just more that it's not bad and it allows the body to do what it does at the highest level. So, really cool. And I like the way that you worded the happy accidents things as well. It's kind of, I think whether or not they would use that wording is irrelevant, because most people that are in this space, myself fully included, it's like, yeah, when you connect the dots, you're like, this is insane how I even got here. This was like a perfect combination of things that led me to this today. So was that, it was the microbiome stuff specifically that led you to the passion with Crohn's and colitis. That's really what got you lit up about that.
For the most part, I mean, I've dealt with gut issues my entire life. My mom almost died when I was 11, 12 years old. She had gut issues her entire life, and one day it came out to a perforated bowel. We didn't know. She was laying in bed, just trying to let the gas pass like she normally does. And my stepdad eventually made her go. She hates hospitals. She's worked in the medical system. She didn't want to go, made her go. The surgeon said, like, had it been a couple more hours, you probably would have died. Her bowel perforated and she was leaking contents into her abdominal cavity. She went septic and they had to do emergency surgery that night and removed 18 inches of bowel. I had gut issues in my early 20s. Things got really severe. I was dealing with, I was in strongman competitions, 180 pounds, give you an idea. So I was a pretty small strongman. I was the only guy under 220. But the only guy who could pick up the 375-pound Atlas stone and put it on the shelf.
Nice.
So I was strong. I was also on steroids. That didn't help my gut. But
Thank you for transparency.
yeah, got to be honest here. Yeah. And so that definitely popped things off. But I got really sick. I lost 25, 30 pounds. I went from picking up 550 pounds on a deadlift to barely being able to pick up 50 without extreme fatigue. 15 bowel movements a day, 10-minute transit time. I'd eat and I'd look, my dinner would be in the toilet, like undigested whole foods. And so it's been pretty close to home. I've had the blood in the stool. And so it really got me interested in Crohn's colitis specifically. It just made sense. I started working more specifically in gut health. And the more severe the cases I started working with, the more severe the cases started to come to see me for help. Till my first ulcerative colitis client came to see me many years ago, and we fixed her up. Took about 90 days, bing, bang, boom. We just reverse engineered the process. And so obviously that was probably a lucky case. Looking back, it was diet, nutrition, exercise, basics that had worn and torn her gut down. I use the analogy, it's almost as if you're wearing a pair of shoes without socks on and you rub that heel raw till it blisters and bleeds. That's one way we get bowel disease. The second is it's immediate. So now you got sand or glass in your shoe and now you got a problem. And we see these two ways. And so that's actually how I got connected to all these amazing doctors. She was working with Dr. Yusuf Salibi at Carolina Holistic Medicine, or Carolina Functional Holistic Medicine, who actually is connected with the FLCC, and Dr. Peter McCullough and Paul Merrick and all these amazing doctors. I just was brought right into their circle because we did something they couldn't do. And so it really opened my eyes to what's going on. And so we saw people going from 15, 20, 50 bowel movements a day in a few short weeks or months, after 20 years of drugs and medication in Western medicine, to finally having their lives back. No pain, no blood, no mucus, no urgency, normal bowel movements, back to having energy. They can get their jobs back, have their lives back. And what hooked me was the first little boy I saw at 5 years old who came in with ulcerative colitis, and his doctor was just going to give him drugs for the rest of his life. We found his root cause. We discovered a nasty mold infection. Due to this, the whole family moved out. The house had been remediated. All their health issues got, fixed up because of this little boy. But having this little kid limping around the house, 10, 20 bowel movements a day, blood, mucus, gray in color. He can't be a little boy and play in the sun. Once that shift happened and we fixed his gut, I was hooked. I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, because it's one of the most crippling diseases. And like you said, 5% of the population is dealing with it. So it's pretty bizarre.
Well, and my question after this question, we'll talk about, okay, how do we actually do this? What can we do?
Mhm.
But preceding that, because I'm always fascinated by people's stories and hearing what you were dealing with, I understand that it's not like you were sitting there dying, but that's still, like you said, it's pretty debilitating and it certainly sucks. I'm just kind of curious, what was your thoughts around what was happening? I'm always very interested in how people perceived the health conditions as they were happening. Like, what did you think was going on? Because certainly you recognized it wasn't normal, but I'm
Mhm.
just wondering what your perspective was on it at the time.
Well, my gut issues, I had no
Yes, when you
idea.
were dealing with your stuff, yeah.
I had no clue. I was like, well, it can't be nutrition. I'm eating really well.
Okay.
And this goes back to my early 20s. I mean, I was eating, well, the standard diet, right? I got my grains, I've got Triscuits. Well, I've got grains. Okay. I'm eating chicken. I'm eating beef. I'm eating vegetables. I'm eating normal foods. Why am I so sick? I had no idea that there was something in there causing inflammation and I was contributing to it with some of the junk I was eating. I can look back and understand now I've got an MTHFR SNP. I can't actually utilize folic acid or vitamin B9. I can't extract it into a usable form. It actually makes me go nuts. It messes up my gut pretty bad. Well, all of our grains are sprayed in folic acid. So I'm eating these Triscuits in wheat, which is also, I've got gluten issues now too. It's all compounded. This created my problem. But at the time, I had no clue. I was eating regular food. For the most part, I was 90% healthy. I had no idea. I was getting acne all up my back, down my arms. I had acne down my forearms, but I didn't realize what was actually going on a deeper level, that there was something causing my inflammation.
Mhm.
And this is the analogy I'll say to the listeners is inflammation is never random. If your doctor says you've got an autoimmune condition, you've got an inflammatory condition, you've got whatever it is. If I fell, tripped, and got this pen stuck through my hand, and I went to the hospital, and imagine it's there for 6 months or a year, 5 years, however long you've had gut issues, they look at me and go, you know what, Josh, it looks pretty bad. I'm going to give you some numbing cream for the pain, send you home, do your best. This is just, you have to live with this now. It's the way it is. I'd look at him like he's got three heads. Obviously, there's something in my body, a foreign object that it's trying to heal me from. This is why I'm inflamed. So why don't we just pull it out? And so we look at this for external injuries. What's the infection, the scrape, the puncture, the whatever invasive thing? What caused the problem? When it comes to internal inflammation, the Western medical world looks at these conditions as if they're innate to the human body. Oh, you just have arthritis. You just have bowel disease. You just have Hashimoto's. No, 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 no. There's a dysfunction. The body doesn't make mistakes, but we don't look for it for internal issues. We give it a diagnosis to put it in a box to give it a drug like cookbook medicine.
Mhm.
And that's something I just can't be a part of. And once we picked apart what was really going on inside of my gut, we found massive fungal issues and SIBO conditions and parasites and all kinds of stuff. And that was the pen in my gut. That was the puncture wound.
A great analogy.
Mhm.
Was that a hard paradigm to shift? And here's what I mean, not because I don't want to stereotype it, so I'm asking very directly.
Mhm.
I do have a good chunk of friends actually that, believe it or not, compete in strongman and they've weightlifted at a very high level and competitive level. And
Yeah.
yes, at a certain level, if because he's not even really into like using performance enhancing drugs. It's not like something he was setting out to do, but it's like if you're going to compete at the highest levels, it's kind of the game that you're playing, and he understands that. And so my question is, was it a huge paradigm shift for you to be open to these things? Because I find that people that are in that space, again, I'm stereotyping,
Sure.
but they're very big on like the understanding of nutrition is much different than a holistic sense of nutrition, because we're thinking about like the stuff like you said that's sprayed on it or added to it. They're like, no, 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 you do the macros, you do this is a
Mhm.
whole food, it's good enough, you can have some junk, as long as you're working out. So was that hard to break that paradigm of what like real nutrition actually meant compared to what you had been taught it meant to compete in the sports you were competing in?
I'll level with you. For me, it wasn't.
Okay.
I'm very logic based. Like you give me the evidence, my emotions are based on. It's the thing my wife loves about me the most is that everything I do is like logic. I'm like a computer. You put the input in, I calculate the data. I'm like, that makes sense. This is what we do now, and I just shift gears. And so for me, it totally made sense. The math added up. I thought, oh, I've been screwing this up the whole time. Hard left turn. Let's fix things. But my humanness, my human condition outside of my dumb computer brain did come through. I went, well, I'm having these issues. And so what should I do? I'm already on steroids. Why don't I take more steroids? I'll take more drugs. I'll put more injections in. I'll take more things. This is meant to help heal the tissue. So I put that in my body. I took peptide therapies and more supplements to try to heal the body, but I was still missing the root causes, being the fungus and parasites and other issues. And so one of the things we end up seeing is a lot of the public does that. Even I was a trained professional, quote, trained professional at the time. I just didn't know how untrained I really was. And so what we ended up doing, I said, I don't want medication for this problem. So what did I do? I went to supplements. Well, now I'm on plant-based medication because I'm masking the symptoms or trying to repair them. I'm putting water on the fire while I'm also pouring gasoline. It's going to continue to burn. It just might be more manageable. And so I went after with these plant-based medications to try to mask the symptoms rather than find the root cause. And once I did that, I finally got better. It was a very expensive chase before then. Yeah.
Got it. All right, I'll stop leaving people on a cliffhanger then. I want to know what you discovered. I appreciate that. And I can picture, genuinely, I can picture you being, you come across as very open-minded and just charismatic. Like, I figure that you'd be very open to conversations with people is what I'm trying to say, of alternative stuff. Like, some people, you know what I mean? They get very locked into it, and it's like, they'll talk about the science regarding, like, or the lack thereof, I guess, regarding about some of the dangers of seed oils. And I'm like, okay, does that mean I should just willy-nilly put this in my body as if there's no risk? I don't know about that either. Like, it's almost a little extreme on both sides, but I digress. So
I look at it this way, Evan. I mean, if you keep having friends over to your house and every time shit goes missing from your house, things are getting stolen, how long does it take before you stop inviting them over? Right? Like, how often do you need to keep having health issues and correlate the data to go, we've all been getting sick since these things were introduced, before you take the precaution and stop inviting it into your body? That's my thoughts on that one. Just take a step and give it a guess.
Yeah, you'd hope. So obviously it worked for you, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So in terms of why 5% of the population makes up about 50% of these cases, I would assume that you are of the belief that that is not just due to more modernized diagnostic tools to be able to, put a label on this stuff. And certainly that might be a small percentage of it, but I personally doubt that that is making up such a large disparity here. So where can we start? What are some of the biggest things that is happening that's allowing the 5% population to make up for this? And just to be clear, what are we talking about when we say 5% of the population?
Well, let's get into that. So if we look at globally speaking, right, the first diagnosed case of Crohn's disease was back in I think 1932. So it's been around for almost 100 years. We know Crohn's and colitis and things have existed, but they have gone up exponentially. So in 1990, as per the CDC, people who are actively diagnosed being treated by a doctor, depending on the data stat you look at, it's 1.5 to 3 million cases worldwide of people dealing with bowel disease. And so for those who might be listening going, well, I don't have Crohn's or colitis, why does it matter? It's wear and tear. This is where I sort of broke the mold on bowel disease, is that Western medicine has taken IBS and IBD and split the difference and said they're two different things. I said, what if they're the same? They're just, one's a progressive or a linear progression of the other, right? What happens if you wear and tear that heel in a shoe with no sock? It gets red, it blisters, and then it bleeds. And this is where I look at the difference. And so if we look at this progression, in 1990, there was about 1.5 to 3 million global cases of bowel disease, right? Crohn's and colitis being treated worldwide. In 2020, it was north of 7 million. And so that's not just that we got better diagnostic tools. That's because there's more cases. Well, North America is less than 5% of the global population, but they have almost 4 million of those cases. So they're 50% to 60% of the world's cases of inflammatory bowel disease are in the States. Let's go back to that wear and tear analogy. Depending on the data sets, again, small or large, 60 to 72% of Americans complain of having some kind of gut issue once a week. We're talking about constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloat, pain, cramping, acid reflux, something of the sort, at least once a week. So that could put 72% of Americans on the spectrum of severity who are bound to wear and tear until they develop Crohn's or colitis. And so if 5% of the population has 50% of the global disease, that's an epidemic. And if 72% are on a slippery slope more than any other country in the world, we've got a crisis on our hands. But we also know, there's always more, 93% of the leading causes of death in the USA, your liver disease, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, all these things, Parkinson's, strokes, heart attack, they're connected to your gut. And so we have 72% of people who are being driven towards 93% of disease. That other 7% is suicide, accidents, or self-harm, or injuries of some kind. So every, quote, natural cause of death is unnatural, connected to your gut. And 72% of people are on that slope already. It's a very scary stat. And then 50% of those cases residing in 5% of the population. So we definitely got an epidemic level crisis on our hands that needs to be addressed.
Cool. Well, not cool, but cool that we have something to do about it.
Mm.
It's funny when you get into
Yes.
podcast mode, right? You say like filler words that did not belong there at
Yep.
all. You're like, awesome, man. This is great.
Awesome. You're dying from inside. You're turning inside out. That's really cool.
It's about to be cool.
Yes.
And so I am curious because, obviously I'm in the space as well, and many people that listen are actively in the space, but I think there's always new insights to this. So I was initially trying to figure out in my head, because I don't believe it's this simple, but I'm like, what is a major difference between us and a lot of other countries? And I'm thinking about the use of glyphosate. I'm thinking about the use of
Mhm.
genetically modified organisms, and those often go hand in hand. I doubt that it's that simple. I think there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm curious, after doing what you've done. I mean, you've actually helped people with this, hundreds of people with this. So you clearly have some system of how you're helping them. What are the main things that are contributing to such a small percentage of the population, not only dealing with the majority of these cases, but we're still growing? It seems like there's more and more cases happening.
Yeah, we're almost 8 million now. Estimates are in 2024. So from 1990 to 2020, we went from 1.5 or 3 million to 7-ish million. 2024, it's estimated to be 8 million. So it's exponential growth. And so if we look at what's driving this bowel disease, be it anywhere on the spectrum of moderate to severe, we have to consider antibiotic usage is up 40+% since the year 2000. We have to consider that there are more heavy metals coming into our body than ever, more quote fortified foods than ever before. The vaccine schedule has gone from 3 to 5 childhood schedule to 72 plus, some of them multiple pokes. We got kids getting 150 to 180 jabs of injections of God knows what,
Mhm.
more so than ever before. Heavy metals, aluminums, and mercuries, and all kinds of stuff. We have more pesticide usage than ever before. There was about I want to say 7 to 900. I'll have to get my numbers checked on that one. Approved pesticides for usage in the United States in 1990. I have these 1990 to 2020 stats because of a lecture I did
Okay.
recently. But in 1990, there was 700 to 900 different pesticides approved for use. Today, it's over 19,000. Not only have we gone up in the variety 4, 10 times, whatever the math is on that, we also have 4 times more poundage or tonnage. We pour over 1 billion pounds of pesticides on our food every year. Well, pesticides were designed to kill organisms, living organisms, bugs and bacterium and parasites and worms and all kinds from getting into the food and eating it. Well, if they can kill a fully functional living organism, what do you think they're doing to your individual gut bacteria, which are as important, I argue, as your DNA? And so we completely bastardize this. When we kill off bacterium, what starts to happen? It's like, imagine you have a city and you kill off all the police. What happens? Well, all the gangs and drug dealers and things can run wild because there's nothing keeping the checks and balances. If all the school teachers leave and the cartel moves in, you got a big problem. The whole community is going to fall apart. We have this happening inside of the gut. All of our good bacteria, our beneficial microbes that should be keeping things in check and balance, are being killed off by all of these pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, all these sides, which leaves the opportunistic microbes, your bad guys, to come in and overgrow, contributing to issues. So our 3 primary causes we see of people dealing with some kind of bowel disease is going to be the umbrella of fungus, which is typically candida and mold.
Mhm.
We see a lot of parasites and Clostridia, which is an opportunistic microbe. And so they take these opportunities from inflamed, toxic environments. It's coming in from everywhere. We got toxins left, right, and center. Our immune systems are constantly being challenged. And it's just a really nasty combination. But then the argument is, well, it's just one can of Coca-Cola. It's just one thing of perfume. I use it twice a week. Well, it's one of this a million times over. One drop doesn't fill a bucket, right? It's the whole bucket's being filled by 1,000 different things. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And now we're all sick developing these diseases. And so there are a lot of correlations here to look at, but ultimately it's what opens the door for them to come in.
And I mean, it's very impressive that you can recite these numbers offhand regardless, but so I'm not expecting you to know it for other countries. I just don't
Mhm.
know. Is there anything off the top of your head that you are able to compare? Because I think anyone with common sense could say, like when you said the 700 pesticides, I was like, already, oh my gosh, that's nuts. And then you're like, no, that was 1990. So
Yeah.
way more
Yeah.
than that now. I'm just wondering, and then the 40% increase in antibiotic usage as well. I'm wondering, do you know how that compares to like any European countries, for example? Like how are these numbers different? And if you don't know the specifics, even just talking about it generally is fine. But I'm just
Yeah.
trying to explain to the listener and myself even, yeah, how is this different from a country that clearly, or continent, I'm sorry, that clearly doesn't suffer with this in the same way that we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for example, the UK has 50% more or 50% less toxic, deadly pesticides than we have approved in the USA. So, ones that are known to cause DNA damage, genetic mutation, and all kinds of issues with hormones and development, right? Men born after 2010 or so, or 20, maybe it's 2000, 2010, are having, I mean, this is what I believe is causing a lot of the gender crisis. I believe it's very real because we've seen a lot of these chemicals have been really toxic for people. And as far as hormones are concerned, they've turned male frogs into females or male fish into female fish. And so I don't believe that the how do I say this politically, that the gender dysphoria that we're having is something that's always been. I do believe it's new, but I believe it's largely chemically related because it's changing us from the inside out. That's
Mhm.
undeniable. I think it's a very real thing that's happening. I believe many of these people do believe they're in the wrong body because chemically speaking, there's things that are changing. I do believe that the pesticides we take in are damaging our DNA. We know this for a fact. We know they've been approved. We know that if you look at French fries, for example, in the United States, right, you got 17 ingredients in McDonald's, you got 3 ingredients in the UK, right? So what's happening? We know countries like India and Africa have a tendency to use as much, if not more, antibiotics than we do.
Mhm.
So why aren't they as sick as we are? Because we have many other factors that are contributing to the opportunity to take over when these antibiotics come and destroy our bacterium, right? So we have more things pushing us down. They're out living off the land, getting into the wild, contacting animals, being outside, constantly inoculating with microbes that we're not. So these are very real things that we have to look at in 2020 and say, okay, what is the reality of the situation, feelings aside? I know I'm touching on some really politically charged topics,
Mhm.
but the idea is there's always a reason. And so if we can look at this objectively, we can, these are very real things happening to people, and there's a reason men are being born with smaller genitals than they ever were before, right? There's a reason children are hitting puberty at 7, 8, 9 years old, which is earlier than ever before. It used to be 14 and 16. These things are happening. They're very real. We have to be very aware.
I actually like that you brought it up because I don't ever get into this. I love talking about all things religion, politics outside of work. And so I do tend to be, I wouldn't say careful here, but just I use it to the degree that it's useful. And
Mhm.
I think that what you brought up is interesting. And I think to deny that it doesn't have some impact, especially with the gender thing, that is my interpretation as well. And I'm almost a believer of the best lies are half true. And so
Mhm.
what that means is, for example, I actually speak as a mental health speaker. So I speak in schools, and I know, I know it's not a belief; it's a knowing that when certain kids have come up to me and described those types of feelings, they are not lying. Like it is very
Yes.
real, and you can see it in someone's face and their soul when they're having a real thing that they're distressed by. And I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, like what would cause that in mass? Because it does seem to be happening at a very high amount. And when I go in now, like I'm only 28, so it's not like I'm particularly old, but I was one of the first kids that I saw at least to be like wildly sick. Like, yes, there was some kids with an inhaler, there was some kids on insulin or whatever, but it was not the majority. Like that was definitely weird that I had my stuff and they had their stuff. And now when I go into a school, kids that are 15, so 13-year age difference, it's like, what happened to you guys and girls? Like, it just, I mean, everyone doesn't look well. They look unwell and they
Yeah.
do have conditions. It's like amazing how much they relate when I talk about the physical health side as well, which I actually spare them kind of in the mental health talks that I do.
Yes.
But when I bring that up, they relate to that. It's like, oh yeah, I feel like this. I have headaches all the time. My gut hurts. It's like, wow, and you're a child saying this basically. So no,
Scary.
I think the way that you brought that up is totally cool, and I think it's an interesting thing, and more people need to talk about it in an adult way. Now, what's also interesting to me is that you referenced the UK, because I would imagine, I'm not an expert on all of Europe, but I would have to guess that the UK is probably the closest thing to America, in
Mhm.
Europe. And you're actually saying how much better they are with this type of stuff. Like, I'm thinking about a place like Italy. I went there for the first time last
Mm.
summer, and what they ban and don't allow, and how clean the food is. And that's the common theme in a lot of European countries.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to me that you could reference the one that, from my understanding, again, is probably top one or top three most like the US, and yet they're still doing significantly better. So it's like, well, yeah, obviously they're going to be better off. And then I'm sorry, which countries or continent did you mention for they use a lot of antibiotics but don't have the same issues?
Africa and India.
Africa. Okay. Very interesting. Because they're not using some of the other things that you're
Yeah,
talking
a
about.
lot of it's to do with like UNICEF and Greenpeace going over with medications. People are sick, pump them full of antibiotics, but they don't have nearly the same rates of bowel disease. I've actually got charts, like color coded charts,
Mhm.
and it's very, very sparse over in those countries, even though they have as much, sometimes more antibiotic usage.
Mm.
So we have to look that it's not just the antibiotics we're taking. Yes, they're killing things off, but it's something else driving these opportunities. And so it's a very deep-seated problem that we're seeing. And so unless here's the problem, right? We get so many people, like I was doing earlier, going after these symptoms with supplements. It's plant-based medication. We're never getting to the root. But Western medicine, credit to where it's due, they do a phenomenal job with emergencies and surgery, some of the best in the world. When it comes to chronic inflammatory conditions, it's garbage. It's almost laughable. It should be borderline criminal on how we treat these things because we're just masking symptoms. Right? Imagine, Evan, you've got a hostage in your living room. Like God forbid you're taking hostages, but imagine you got a hostage in your living room and they're screaming for help. Right? It's a cry for help. You put tape over their mouth. Well, suddenly you can't hear them scream. Did you fix the problem? No. The hostage is still not happy to be there. We do the same thing to our body. We're highly inflamed. Your body's screaming for help. We mask it, put tape over its mouth. We give it medications, immunosuppressives, anti-inflammatories. They never fix the problem.
Mm.
And this is why we're so sick. It's just this progressive thing that never gets managed, never gets treated properly.
Well, and and I don't mean to fearmonger because it seems like there's a lot of answers here, which is amazing. But one of the very real issues here is even the people in probably for Canada too, but especially America, somewhere where I live, it's like you can do a lot of stuff and you can really start trying to eat well and do the best that you can, and you're still exposed to a lot of crap. Like the
Mhm.
toxic burdens a lot. So it's really remarkable to hear of the successes that you've had with so many individuals, despite still living in these places, right? Because at times I've talked to my wife and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, do I just go out and do we spend a few months in Europe each year just to like
Mhm.
really, I mean, to get away from this and truly get out of it? But that's not practical for most people. So, in terms of the first steps that people can take, or even just talking about like maybe some of the commonalities of the 300 people that you've helped or 300 plus people that you've helped, what are some of the major things that are like non negotiables? We have to do this if we want a chance at actually resolving some of these conditions and symptoms.
Mm. Well, first thing we have to do, always, let's get to the root cause. Why are you inflamed? Why are you sick? That's number one. That's kind of a no-brainer. But things we have to commonly do, we have to remove toxins. So I'll have them do a toxic inventory, for example. Where are you consuming things that's pushing you over the edge? We have to remove gluten. We have to remove dairy. These things are highly inflammatory, especially in Hashimoto's. There's a process called molecular mimicry.
Mhm.
And that's where, for your listeners, if they're not familiar, your body, say you have Hashimoto's disease, so your body is actively attacking the thyroid. Well, there are proteins in a gluten molecule or gluten that can look like thyroid proteins. And so your body will identify them and can crank up the immune system, causing further damage to the thyroid. And so we see this in other immune conditions. We know a lot of things that can cause a leaky gut, again, our dairy and our gluten here. Our American dairy is actually banned in I forget how many countries because of the chemicals they use. They use something called RBGH, or recombinant bovine growth hormone, to produce more milk, but it's known to cause bone disease and genetic issues and all kinds of inflammatory problems. So it's banned all over the world. Pork and beef and chicken and salmon from the US, they ban everywhere. Um, and so our non-negotiables, number one, we have to do a toxic inventory. Number two, we have to look at diet. You'd be shocked, Evan, the amount of people who come to see me with 20 plus bowel movements a day who argue to tell me that gluten and Taco Bell are perfectly fine. It doesn't cause them any issues. I'm like, you are so inflamed. You don't know. It's like I'm sure somebody's known someone who's been in an abusive relationship who doesn't know it's abusive. To them, it's normal. They don't realize how dysfunctional it is until they leave or come back. Then you know, right? So you're already in the thick of it. You're already 20 bowel movements a day. What's one taco from Taco Bell? Like, what does it matter? So we have to go through that. We have to go through stress. We have to go through sleep hygiene. We have to do toxic inventories because these are our biggest contributing factors. The next steps is figuring out what are the major things. Back to that puncture, right? This pen is stuck inside my hand. Once we have that figured out, what is the thing causing the problem? We need to be able to take it out of the body. So that means opening up drainage pathways. Maybe we're doing grounding. We're doing bile duct stuff. Maybe we're doing promotions with bitters. Maybe we're doing coffee enemas or gallbladder flushes with oils and Epsom salts and all kinds of stuff to get it cleared, to open your pathways. This is the process we have to take. But the simple, easy, cost-effective, and very lucrative is giving medications for the rest of your life. And so it's 10 minutes at the doctor at tops, here's your drugs and medications, rather than spending hours and months going through how to actually fix the problem. So non-negotiables are a pretty broad spectrum. I wish I could have answered that a bit clearer for you, but that's sort of the idea.
Well, no, it gives me plenty to work with. And so I don't want to, I've been waiting for this question, honestly. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it does have to do with the therapies that people can use. So you mentioned actually that you took peptide therapy, I think in your weightlifting or strongman days. I'm sure you're still hopefully active, but during that time where you're just like, okay, I can add something else to
do I look that fat to you? I mean,
right. So the one thing I'm interested in, and listen, I'm very amateur at this. I got into the peptide thing about last year, and we actually had a guest, fellow FDN, on named Awais Spall, and he's a chemist, but he's also, and I would say this to his face, he's a very interesting cat, and he's willing to use his body as an experiment, right? And he has the intelligence and knowledge to understand, okay, I'm doing something without this being wildly peer reviewed, and there might be some risks to this, but I'm willing to take that risk. I don't think that others are always aware of that, but I am curious because the things that I've heard specifically with these types of gut issues with BPC 157, for example, I mean, are almost miraculous. And that's sometimes without them changing other things. So do you have any place in what you're doing for those types of therapies, or is that just something that you stay away from and say, hey, let's focus just on what we can change?
100% I believe on integrative. Okay. We use all kinds of stuff. I'll recommend they go to the doctor to get prescriptions for some medications. We'll use supplementation, very root cause focused. We do diet, nutrition as well. We do lab testing, urine, hair, stool, whatever we have to do. It's all part of the process. But things like peptides are very useful. But again, if my house is on fire and I'm throwing water on it in peptides to put the fire out, awesome. I'm trying to rebuild. But you can't rebuild the house while it's still on fire. Sure. Now, if you can build it faster than it burns down, power to you. But now you're dependent on this BPC to rebuild your tissues. And so they have a lot of benefits. We'll use KPV, it's another peptide, BPC for building the tissues. We might use like thymosin alpha 1 or TB4 frag. These are immunomodulating peptides that can modify like your T cells, these Treg cells that help regulate your immune processes. There's all kinds of things we can use in conjunction with pharmaceuticals as well. This is why we refer out and work with a lot of doctors in these processes, because I'm not a medical doctor. I can't recommend you go and get low dose naltrexone, for example, or LDN, and pair it with TB4 frag or KPV. But I can have a doctor do that under our recommendation. And that's what we can do. So I think there's always moving parts. There's always points of consideration. Like you said, you have to be open-minded, because if we get tunnel vision and go, this is the only way to fix things, when new information comes along, you never learn. And you're actually not only doing a disservice to yourself, but to the clients you're working with, and it's supposed to be helping.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate you answering that, because to me, I do find it interesting. I used the injectable BPC for an injury. It was unbelievable. I could not believe how much that helped me. It's not even possible that it was placebo. It was a cracked rib. I mean, it was wild. And then, of course, you start wondering, okay, well, if it did that fast, what else is it doing in my body? Do I want to take this every day? Probably not. But then, I saw some of the benefits with the gut stuff as well, especially taking it orally. And I'm like, okay, this probably has its time and place, and I get that. But I don't think I'm ever, not anytime soon at least, going to get the science behind it that I would like. So really I rely on anecdotes. And I kind of asked half selfishly, just kind of curious, like, all right, are other people using this? Have they used it longer term? Are they seeing success with their clients? Do they think that there's a place for it? So I think maybe I'm a little more open to it than I should be at this point. But then I also look, I'm like, damn, I've done some really stupid stuff in my life and I'm still here. Like, eating well and taking some BPC doesn't seem like the worst thing. I don't know. Not medical advice, just my opinion. All right. When you were talking about some of the stuff that you dealt with, like candida and other fungal overgrowth, I'm assuming that you had to involve some type of testing for that. So do you use testing in your own practice? Because I know you're not an FDN, obviously. So that's a core part for us. I'm curious how you're finding those things in people, or do you just more address them based off symptomology?
So a bit of both. So we try to do our best to use symptoms as best we can. Specializing in IBD, we rarely need testing. Now, luckily, because I do work with doctors, I'm a medical lecturer, I'm a doctor's consultant for IBD as well. I have access to things like Mosaic Diagnostics and Vibrant. Like I can get these physicians only testing done, which is really nice. So I do have that ability. But as far as testing goes, we don't always need it. Now, the deeper we get into the layers, the more we need it, but the severe stuff. So for example, there are 3 primary root causes we see for people dealing with bowel disease or chronic bowel disease like like Crohn's and colitis, which is primarily going to be, like I mentioned, parasites, Clostridia, and fungus or mold, which are kind of in the fungal umbrella. And so those are pretty easy to detect based on symptoms, and we can prioritize them. But maybe we're 3, 4, 5 months in, you're 95% better, but there's still a little bit. Now it's time to do some testing to figure out what else is lingering. Are there heavy metals involved? Do you still have some fungal issues? Those can take a year, 2 years for some people. Fungus is a long game. And so what does that look like? But for the most part, we're dealing with bowel disease symptomatology with over 300 cases now reversed. It's almost too easy to look at symptoms and go, okay, this is what's causing your problem. But I tell my clients that I still want to do my due diligence, right? You give me a hammer for long enough, eventually everything looks like a nail. And so the human error can go, oh yeah, you got this, and this, you got psoriasis, you got joint pain, you got back pain. Fatty foods give you problems. You grind your teeth in your sleep and you're anemic, low sex drive, and a SIBO condition. You got parasites. That's probably what it is. But what if it's something else? So we still go through our processes and do our questionnaires and intakes, but that's the idea. So
I
sometimes it can be very simple.
Yeah, I appreciate the objectivity there, because anyone that is an FDN or an FDN in training or a future FDN knows that we kind of take this approach of, okay, always use the testing, because, you can't rely on symptoms. And I think what you just said is perfect, though, because you just brought up how, if you have the hammer long enough, every problem does look like a nail, and that is a human error. Now, I also think there's something to be said about an individual who is niched to the point of working with a very specific subset of the population that is actually getting diagnosed by Western medicine. So fair enough. That's different than the average FDN that might work with, on one week we have a cystic acne case, the next week we have a Crohn's case, the next week we have a mental health thing. So it's not that there's not even overlapping similarities to a lot of those issues. There really are, but it's different, and it's different enough that it is worth diving into that stuff. So I think that's totally cool. I appreciate
I
that.
agree with testing in those cases for sure. With what we do, like you mentioned, testing is hugely important. So I don't want the listeners to be confused and go, well, Evan says I should test, Josh says I shouldn't. I'm not saying you should or should not. I think it's very much, you're right. We do hundreds of cases of these. We see a lot of the same things. The symptomatology has been just expertised to a science. However, when you're dealing with a mix of things, do the testing. In our field, symptoms actually trump testing, because we find, for example, parasite symptoms are hard to detect on a test. Parasites are hard to find unless you know functional blood chemistry, unless you know the symptomatology. But you try a stool test, good luck. 99% of the time they're coming up negative anyway, right? So they're very hard to see. This is where symptoms come in. But when you're dealing with a wide array of things, go get the testing, man. Like, the best way to know is to test, manage, and retest for sure.
Sure. And agreed with that, especially when you're bringing up things like parasites. Like, we fully acknowledge there's no stool test out there yet that's perfect for any of that stuff. So a lot of FDNs do end up developing the idea of, like, okay, what is this person dealing with? Or did they not get better in the way that I expected? That can be a huge hint of, hey, maybe the test results here were not perfect and we were missing out on some stuff. So yeah. And listen, that's the whole point of the podcast. I mean, we didn't get 330 episodes in by not bringing on people with slightly different perspectives. I actually think that's the best thing to do. I think it's important to challenge ourselves. And this is by far not the most different podcast. That's for sure. You're very much in alignment with most of the stuff that we do anyway. And so in terms of the people that you're working with, as we kind of get to just about the end of this, we have about 8-9 minutes left. I want to talk about, of course, your business and where people can find you. They've probably been struggling with this, and some of them are listening because they've been struggling. So I'm curious, how do these people ever even end up finding you? Because, they probably go to Western medicine first. It's how they got the diagnosis or diagnoses. And, they might have been told that, hey, it's just this ultimatum. So it does take some thinking outside of the box to even find someone like you, and let alone be committed to, hey, no, I can do this. So where do these people find you?
Well, easiest way if you want to get a hold of me is just to head to gutsolution.ca. That's gutsolution, all singular.ca for Canada. And you can get everything you need there. You can get access to all of our stuff, our programs and protocols. You can book a call. We got Facebook groups. I got a Facebook group with about 13,500 people called IBD Support and Solutions. And so most of the people find us through there, of course, other podcasts or TV or wherever we are. But gutsolution.ca is the hub to find everything, including the podcast all about the gut, which is a great way to be able to reach us. But as far as people looking for help, the reason they end up stumbling upon us is because most of these people either knew and are scared and want a second opinion, or they've been working with their doctor and they're not getting the help that they need. They're not getting the results. They're not getting solutions. They're not actually getting it fixed. And they're sick of just chasing and managing this thing for the rest of their lives. They actually want to remove the thing causing the problem and give their body what it needs to heal.
Yeah, I guess just sick and tired of being sick and tired. I have such and I'm a little biased because I was this person, so I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I do have a a large amount of respect for the people that don't take no for an answer and just say, hey, no, I'm going to keep trying to do different things and figure this out. Cause
Yes.
that's a tough mindset to have in life in general. Like, even if you're just trying to hit a
Mhm.
certain goal, let alone, I mean, you're struggling greatly while trying to do this stuff normally. So, huge respect for anyone that has done this. Now, another thing I wanted to ask is, and you kind of already mentioned some awesome stories today, but I always like to take the end to just shout out maybe like a cool client testimonial or client story. So you mentioned the one of the very young man, but I mean, you got 300 plus of these now. So
Mhm.
I'm sure there's some others mixed in there. Is there any story of someone that came to you? I almost word it like this: that's like at the end of their ropes. Like, maybe they're at the point where, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to try because I've tried a bunch of stuff. It's not working. And then you were actually finally able to be that beacon of light for them that could, show them that, no, not only can you do this, they were able to do it. So are there any
Yeah.
stories like that that really stick out to the degree that you're able to share?
Totally. So we had recently actually done one just this February. It actually just came out in April, I believe it was end of April. So there's a TV show called Know the Cause with Doug Kaufman. He's been around for 30 years. And so one of his good friends happened to find us on Facebook through the same group named Louis. And so Louis was having issues for 17, 18 years, severe colitis. And Doug remembers going to the hospital. Doctors are preparing them for a funeral. He remembers sitting at the foot of his bed, praying at the foot of his bed because they expected him to die
Mhm.
several times over. And so he was right at the end of his rope. This was a last resort opportunity for them. He's tried every drug, every biologic, every medication. He was losing weight. He's a plumber. He's got a plumbing business as well in Dallas, Texas. And he was just absolutely outsourcing everything, couldn't work. Finances were coming down. He says, this is it. This is the only thing I have left. We went back in and figured out what was wrong. 6 months, you'd never know he's had IBD. Took us 6 months to undo 17 years. And it's just by looking at the root cause. We went to this guy from being literally on his deathbed to thriving. He's gained like 30 pounds. He feels amazing. His energy, he's working again. He was just texting me the other day. He's like under his house, like on his back for 3 hours. And he's got the energy. There's no accidents, no urgency because we found the thing that was inflaming his body. And I'll tell you, Evan, you know where it started? 25 years ago, he got his gallbladder removed. And that started this slow wear and tear process of his body falling apart. We had a fella come in recently, 22 years old, and his doctor said, well, you got IBS. 6 months after that, oh, it's actually colitis. Well, how did I get it? Well, it's genetic. And it's probably, I kid you not, blamed his ethnicity. He says it's probably because you're Jewish. Jewish people tend to get it more than other people, and that's why you have it. Well, okay, let's take the timeline back. You started a brand new job. What job was it? It was, well, I was doing HVAC. So he's in ventilation systems. Did you wear your PPE? What's PPE? That tells me everything I need to know. I said, based on your symptoms, what's going on? I believe you have a mold infection. Did a urine test, came back positive for ochra toxin A, a well-known common mold infection known to cause kidney issues, liver issues, and gut disease. So that was the cause of his ulcerative colitis. It took us 10 weeks and he was symptom-free when he was supposed to have it for life. And lo and behold, Evan, he's still Jewish. And so that's the thing.
Shockingly.
Shockingly, right? And so we have to look at this and understand that there's always a root, no matter where you are.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's a heck of a way to finish because there are some wild things that I could say about that because there are wild things that
Yes.
are said in Western medicine sometimes. And God bless you guys and gals. We love you. But I mean, that kind of stuff is just, I could have, the genetic thing I'm just used to. I could have taken that, but it's like, really? Like that? Yes, that is why all the Jews have colitis. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, maybe,
everybody.
maybe there's a little. All right. Again, Evan, stay on track. All right, here we go. So, with this wrapping up, first of all, man, you're a fantastic guest. It's very obvious that you're a podcast host. This is just really fun to talk to you. And I love the wisdom that has obviously come with experience. There's such a confidence without any arrogance in this, right? It's just like, no, 10 weeks. Oh, 6 months. Like, it's so cool to be able to provide these life-changing results for people. And even more interesting is as long as you've done this, you have not let this, it doesn't seem routine for you at all. It seems like it's very special to you each time to be able to deliver this to someone still.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. This will never get old to me. It's something that's so life-changing, and honestly, I'm blessed to be a part of it. I can create these programs, these protocols, but they have to do the work. I get people all like, Josh, you changed my life. I'm like, I didn't do anything. Like, I gave you the data on a piece of paper that was easy to follow. They're the ones who have to do the work. And then sometimes there are hard changes. Sometimes there's not. It's literally like, take this thing and you'll be fine. But that's the idea, is it really comes down to the individual to put in the work, to commit to this, to go, I want the change. The hardest part about my job, Evan, is convincing people that they can get better. That's really, the rest of it's up to them.
Awesome. All right. So gutsolution.ca if you want to find Josh. And then can you shout out your podcast too? I never look at them as competition. I look at this as like
Totally.
modern, way better TV, where it's like you didn't just watch one TV show, you tuned into a lot of them. So I think it's totally cool to shout out yours. I'd love for people to know where it's at.
I love that. I do the same thing. It's all about info, and nobody listens to one podcast always for forever. Very small percentage. The podcast is Reversible, the ultimate gut health podcast. That's reverse-able. And we've got some of the top of the top. We actually had Reed on there recently. Episodes not published yet at the time of recording. We've had William Lee and Stephen Gundry and all kinds of famous physicians and doctors and specialists. We actually have Bruce Lipton coming on here this summer, which is really exciting. Biology of Belief. So it's just been amazing having people all aboard here and getting on board. So reversiblepod.com or Reversible, the ultimate gut health podcast.
Sweet. And our final question for you, the signature question on the show. And it can be about, gut health if you'd like, but it's a general health question. And so the question is, if we were to give you a magic wand, you could wave it and you could get all of our viewers and listeners to do one thing for their health. That means you can get us to start doing one thing, or you can get us to stop doing one thing for our health. What's the one thing that Josh gets us to do?
I wish you prepared me for this, but here's what I'll give you.
Sorry.
Throw me under the bus. No, the number one thing I'd tell people to start doing, find a farmer's market locally. Buy your meat locally, buy your vegetables locally. They don't have to have an organic label for you to have the conversation to know that there is less pesticides or fungicides or something on them. If you think, well, it's way too expensive to buy organic meat, to buy it from a farmer's market. There's no markets near me even. I know people in New York City who will drive 3-4 hours upstate New York, bring a cooler in a van, 3 or 4 friends will buy a half a cow. They all chip in and split it. It's actually as much or cheaper than going to the grocery store for the garbage meat. So there's always alternatives, and simply changing even 3 meals a week to organic can make a dramatic difference. I actually have an episode with Dr. Tom O'Brien. We talked about the implications of percentages of health outcomes in, infancy and baby development and IQs and all kinds. So shop local, find a farmer, get some friends, split the cost, save some money.
Bam. Josh, thank you so much, man.